"By spring, you will give birth to our son," the mountain man told the obese girl. Winter arrived early that year, covering the mountains in thick white silence. Snow lay heavy on pine branches, and the narrow road leading up the valley looked more like a forgotten path than a place where people still lived. This was where Myra came, carrying a small suitcase and a heart full of tired hope. She was an adult woman who had learned, from a very young age, how cruel words could be. People often judged her by her body before they ever listened to her voice. Over the years, those judgments had slowly pressed down on her spirit, making her feel smaller inside even when the world insisted on seeing her as too much. Myra had left the city behind after one more disappointment that broke her strength. A job she believed would finally give her stability was taken away without warning. Friends she trusted were busy with their own lives. Her family cared, but they never truly understood how deeply lonely she felt. When she saw an advertisement for temporary work in a mountain region, helping maintain a closed lodge and caring for the surrounding land through winter, she accepted without thinking too much. She did not come looking for answers. She came because she needed quiet. The lodge stood alone between tall mountains, old but strong, built from dark wood that smelled of time and effort. The air there was clean and sharp, and every breath felt like a small shock to her lungs. On her first day, she noticed how loud silence could be. There were no horns, no crowds, no constant reminders that she did not fit, just wind, snow, and her own thoughts. It was on her second morning that she met him. The mountain man appeared without sound, as if he had stepped out of the snow itself. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed in worn clothes that looked like they belonged to the land more than to any store. His face was calm, marked by age and weather, and his eyes were steady, observing without judgment. People in nearby villages spoke of him in half-sentences and quiet tones. Some called him strange, others wise. Most simply avoided him. He introduced himself with few words and said he lived higher up the slope. He had come to check the water lines that ran near the lodge, something he did every winter. His voice was slow and deep, not rough, but firm in a way that made Myra listen. He did not stare at her body. He looked at her face as if that was enough. Their first conversations were simple. He spoke about the weather, the animals, the way winter tested everything it touched. Myra mostly listened. She felt awkward at first, unsure of how to speak to someone who seemed so comfortable with silence. But strangely, she did not feel nervous. The usual tight feeling in her chest eased when he was around. Days passed. Snow kept falling. Myra settled into her routine, cleaning, cooking, checking supplies, and walking short distances when the weather allowed. The mountain man came and went, sometimes helping with heavy tasks, sometimes just standing nearby, watching the clouds move. He never stayed long, but his presence left an impression, like a stone placed quietly in water. One evening, a storm trapped them inside the lodge. Wind pushed hard against the walls, and the fire cracked loudly in the old stone fireplace. Myra made tea, her hands shaking slightly from the cold and from being near someone she did not fully understand. They sat across from each other, the firelight dancing between them. The mountain man watched the flames for a long time before speaking. When he did, his words came slowly, as if he had chosen them carefully. "Winter takes," he said, "but it also prepares." Myra nodded, not fully sure what he meant. She had learned that winter often felt like loss. It reminded her of everything she did not have. He turned his eyes to her then, studying her in a way that felt different from the stares she knew. There was no hunger in it, no mockery, only certainty. "By spring," he said, "your life will not be the same." She smiled weakly, thinking he meant the job or her return to the city. People often said such things when trying to be kind. But then he continued, his voice steady, unshaken by the storm outside. "By spring, you will give birth to our son." The words landed in the room like a sudden silence after thunder. Myra felt the air leave her lungs. Her mind struggled to understand what she had just heard. She searched his face for humor, for confusion, for anything that might soften the meaning. There was none. He was not smiling. He was not reaching for her. He spoke as if stating a simple truth, like the coming of snow or the rising of the sun. "That's not possible," she said quickly, her voice tight. "You don't know me, you don't know my life." He did not argue, he did not repeat himself. He only nodded once, as if acknowledging a fact she would someday see for herself. "Time will show," he said quietly. The storm eased later that night, and the mountain man left without another word. Myra did not sleep. She sat by the dying fire, replaying his sentence again and again. Anger rose first. How dare he say something so personal, so impossible? Then fear followed. Not fear of him, but fear of what his calm certainty had stirred inside her. She had always believed certain doors were closed to her. She had told herself that some lives were simply not meant to grow in certain ways. His words challenged that belief, not gently, but firmly. She hated that they stayed with her. In the days that followed, she avoided him when she could. When he came to check the land, she found reasons to be busy elsewhere. Still, she felt his presence even when he was not there. The mountains seemed to watch her, silent and patient. Winter deepened, snow piled higher, and Myra's thoughts grew louder. She told herself the mountain man was mistaken, or strange, or speaking in symbols she did not understand. Yet in quiet moments doubt crept in. Her body felt different lately, tired in new ways, sensitive. She blamed the cold, the altitude, the change in routine. Anything was easier than facing the question forming in her mind. One morning she stood outside the lodge, wrapped in a thick coat, staring at the pale winter sun struggling through clouds. She placed a hand over her stomach without thinking. The gesture surprised her. She pulled her hand away quickly, as if caught doing something foolish. "This is just the mountains," she whispered to herself. "They make people think strange things." But deep inside, something had already begun to shift. Winter had not finished with her yet, and neither, it seemed, had fate. The days after the mountain man's words were some of the longest Myra had ever experienced. Every moment seemed to stretch, filled with quiet tension. At first, she tried to ignore what he had said. She told herself it was nonsense, a strange story told by a man who lived alone among the snow and mountains. But his calm certainty had a way of staying in her mind. It was not just what he said. It was the way he said it, as if speaking a fact of nature rather than a personal prediction. Myra's routine continued, but nothing felt normal anymore. She woke early, tending to the lodge, fetching firewood and checking the water lines, but each task felt heavier. She noticed small things in her body that she had ignored before, tiredness that did not come from work, a quiet ache she could not place, and sudden moments of nausea. At first, she blamed the altitude or the winter cold. She told herself that living in the mountains was harder than the city, that her body simply needed time to adjust. But deep down, she could not completely push away the memory of his words. Curiosity mixed with fear. On one of the cold mornings, she decided to visit the small clinic in the nearest village. The path was narrow, slippery with ice, and winds cut sharply across the ridges. Myra wrapped herself tightly in her coat, gripping her scarf as she made her way down. The clinic was a humble building, quiet and warm inside. She felt nervous, not because she feared doctors, but because she feared what they might tell her. Inside, the nurse greeted her kindly. Myra explained her symptoms: fatigue, nausea, and some other minor changes she had noticed. The nurse listened carefully, took notes, and then suggested a series of tests. Myra's hands shook slightly as she agreed. Waiting for results felt like waiting for a storm she could not control. Every passing hour made the mountain man's words echo louder in her mind. When the results came, Myra was stunned. Her life, which had seemed so predictable, suddenly felt uncertain. She sat on a bench outside the clinic, gripping the edges tightly, trying to make sense of everything. Fear gripped her like ice in her chest. Her first instinct was to run, to go back to the lodge and pretend she had never spoken to anyone. But there was no escaping the truth. Her body was changing in ways that confirmed what she had not dared to believe. Myra returned to the lodge in silence. The mountains were quiet, their snow-covered peaks watching her every step. She avoided the mountain man at first. She did not want to see the calm certainty in his eyes, nor did she want to answer questions she was not ready to face. Yet, no matter how far she tried to push the thought away, it returned. His words were no longer just words. They were a shadow that followed her through every room, every meal, every breath. The next time he appeared on the path, Myra felt her heart pound. He did not speak at first, only gave a slight nod. She was tempted to turn away, to hide inside the lodge, but something in her curiosity pulled her forward. She finally said nothing, only let him watch her for a moment. "You have questions," he said quietly, breaking the silence that had grown between them. Myra swallowed, unsure how to respond. I don't understand," she said finally. "How could you know something like that?" He shrugged slightly. "I do not force life to follow my words. I only observe what will come." His tone was calm, almost gentle. "Sometimes people need time to see what is already there." Myra did not know how to reply. His words were both comforting and frightening. She felt a strange mixture of anger and longing. She had spent so long believing that life was something she could only watch pass, that hope belonged to other people. Yet in his presence, hope felt possible, though fragile. The days continued, and the snow slowly began to soften under the sun. Myra's routine shifted as she began paying closer attention to herself. She started keeping a small notebook, recording how she felt each day. She noticed patterns, moments of dizziness, changes in appetite, even feelings she could not explain, like sudden joy at the sight of sunlight on the mountains. Every detail seemed small and ordinary, yet together they built a story her mind could not deny. Fear mixed with wonder. Myra found herself asking questions she had never dared to ask. Could she really become a mother? Could she handle the changes in her life? Would the mountain man's words come true? Each question left her both excited and terrified. The more she thought about it, the more she realized how little control she had over what was happening, and that lack of control was what frightened her most. At the same time, she started noticing small ways her life was changing beyond the physical. Her mind felt sharper, more aware. She began to care about her health in ways she had ignored for years. She prepared meals carefully, slept when her body demanded rest, and walked longer distances to build strength. Slowly, she began accepting that her body was capable of growth and change, even if she did not yet fully understand what that meant. The mountain man noticed the change too. He did not speak much, but he offered quiet support. Sometimes he would leave small bundles of firewood near the lodge, or show her a path that made the climb easier. He did not offer advice about what she should do. He only made the path before her slightly smoother, as if acknowledging the struggle without interfering. Myra came to respect him not because he gave her answers, but because he seemed to trust her to find them herself. As winter slowly melted into early spring, Myra's fear began to evolve into cautious hope. She still felt doubt, especially in quiet moments when the lodge was empty, and the mountains seemed to whisper secrets she could not understand. But alongside the fear was a growing sense of strength. For the first time, she realized that she was not powerless. Her body, though changing in ways she had never anticipated, was not a burden but a vessel of possibility. She began to see herself not as someone limited by the past or by others' judgments, but as someone capable of new beginnings. Even so, Myra struggled with loneliness. Living in the mountains meant long stretches without human contact, and the thought of sharing her fears and hopes with anyone else felt impossible. The mountain man remained her only companion, though he was always at a distance. She felt the urge to speak, to ask him how he could know such things, but every time she opened her mouth, the words failed. Instead, she listened. She observed. And slowly, she learned a new kind of understanding, one that came from patience and attention rather than hurried conversation. One afternoon, the sun broke through clouds and painted the mountains in soft gold light. Myra walked along a narrow ridge, carrying a basket of firewood, when she realized how different she felt. The fear that had once dominated her days was no longer constant. It had been replaced by something quieter, a steady awareness that life was moving forward, whether she was ready or not. She paused, looking out over the valley below. Snow had melted in patches, revealing green grass underneath. She thought of the mountain man and his words. Maybe he had been right, not because he controlled fate, but because he had seen something she could not yet see in herself. Myra returned to the lodge that evening with a strange sense of calm. She prepared dinner, laid out the table, and even hummed a little tune she had forgotten she knew. The mountains were still quiet, but the silence no longer felt heavy. It felt alive, as if it were waiting with her, patient and enduring. That night she slept deeply for the first time in weeks. Her dreams were full of light and movement, not shadows and worry. When she woke the next morning, snow had almost entirely melted. Spring was arriving, bringing with it longer days and warmer sunlight. Myra felt it in her bones. The world was changing, and she was changing with it. The mountain man appeared that day, as if he had known she would be ready. He greeted her with a nod and a quiet smile. She looked at him and, without speaking, realized she no longer needed to demand explanations. She understood that some truths could not be rushed, that some journeys must be walked slowly, and that some growth must be felt before it could be named. The following weeks were filled with careful attention to her body and her mind. Myra learned to listen to the small signals of fatigue, hunger, and emotion. She learned to accept help when offered and to trust herself when alone. Her routine became a rhythm of awareness, strength, and patience. And throughout it all, the mountain man was present, silent but steady, a reminder that life's paths were sometimes hidden until the right time. Myra's fear had not disappeared entirely, but it had transformed. She no longer trembled at the thought of what was coming. She faced each day with cautious curiosity, willing to discover who she was becoming. In the quiet moments when she looked out over the mountains, she began to believe that spring might indeed bring change, not just in the world around her, but in the life she carried inside. And so, as the snow melted and the first green shoots appeared, Myra waited. She did not know exactly what the future held. She did not understand the mountain man's words completely. But she felt ready to face the unknown, to face herself, and to step into the life that was slowly, quietly preparing to arrive. Spring had begun its slow, quiet work on the mountains. Snow melted in patches, revealing dark soil and the first stubborn green shoots of grass. Streams, long trapped under ice, flowed with clear, cold water, and the air carried the soft scent of earth and life. Myra felt the change everywhere she went. The lodge no longer seemed lonely in the same way, and even the mountains felt warmer, though their peaks still held snow. With the changing season, she began to notice the changes inside herself. At first, they were small, moments of energy when she had expected tiredness, an unexpected feeling of lightness when she walked along the ridge, and mornings when she woke without the heavy sadness that had settled in her chest during winter. These were subtle, quiet signs, but they made her heart lift slightly every time she noticed them. Myra began to understand that she was not simply waiting for something to happen. She was becoming something new, day by day. The mountain man continued his quiet visits, never forcing his presence, never asking questions that made her feel exposed. Instead, he offered simple gestures, a basket of firewood left near the door, advice about the safest path to cross a stream, or a gentle nod when she looked toward him on the ridge. Myra began to understand that his way of helping was not to control her life, but to create space for her to grow. She respected him more than she could explain, not because of what he knew, but because of the way he trusted her to find her own strength. With each passing day, Myra became more aware of her own resilience. She had spent years feeling small and incapable, but now she began to see her body and mind as allies rather than enemies. She cared for herself in ways she never had before, preparing nourishing meals, moving carefully through the snow-melting trails, and even speaking softly to herself when fear or doubt began to rise. These small acts of self-care were quiet revolutions against the years of shame she had carried. Myra also began to notice her emotions in a new way. She had always felt them, of course, but now they seemed sharper, more alive. Moments of joy surprised her, often in simple things. The sunlight hitting a frozen branch, the call of a bird in the morning, or the first green shoots poking through the snow. Sometimes she cried unexpectedly, not out of sadness, but because she realized how deeply she had missed feeling connected to life. These moments made her more aware of the possibility of change, not just in herself, but in her future. One day, as she walked along a familiar path toward the stream, the mountain man appeared again. He did not speak immediately. He simply watched her as if studying her progress. Myra felt no fear now, only curiosity. "You have grown stronger," he said finally, his voice soft. "Not because the mountains are easy, but because you have learned to move with them, not against them." Myra paused. His words felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. I feel different," she admitted, "but I still don't understand everything. I still don't know what is happening or why you said those words in winter." He shook his head slightly, a small smile touching his lips. "Some truths do not arrive all at once. They need time, patience, and understanding. You have all three, even if you do not know it yet." His words reminded Myra of the quiet patience she had begun to feel in herself. She realized that change did not always arrive in dramatic moments or loud announcements. Sometimes it came slowly, almost imperceptibly, like the melting snow feeding the streams and waking the seeds buried in the soil. The mountain man's certainty was not about forcing the future. It was about recognizing the natural unfolding of life, and Myra began to understand that she, too, had a role in allowing that unfolding. As the weeks passed, Myra noticed more profound changes in herself. Her body responded differently to movement, her emotions seemed more balanced, and even her thoughts felt clearer. She realized she had been carrying years of self-doubt, shame, and fear, and now those feelings were slowly losing their grip. In their place grew confidence and awareness, a quiet, strong energy that gave her courage she had never known before. The mountain man remained a quiet observer. Sometimes he would speak of life in simple terms, how seasons shifted, how animals adapted to challenges, how patience and observation could teach lessons faster than force or anger. Myra listened carefully. His words were not instructions, they were lessons in awareness, reminders that life's rhythms could not be hurried, only honored. And as she listened, she began to see parallels in her own life. She could no longer control what had begun within her, but she could choose how to respond, how to nurture herself, and how to embrace the future she could now imagine. During one afternoon, Myra walked to the edge of the forest, watching the sunlight fall through the trees. She noticed how the world seemed both harsh and gentle, dangerous yet beautiful. The thought struck her that life, like the mountains, could not be predicted perfectly. Yet it could be understood if one paid attention. She felt a surge of gratitude for her strength, for the mountains, and even for the man whose words had startled her into awareness. By now, Myra's fear had softened into cautious hope. She no longer trembled at the thought of the unknown. Instead, she faced each day as a challenge and a gift, knowing that she had the capacity to handle whatever came next. She began to dream in small ways, plans for her future, hopes for her child, and a growing desire to return to the world with the strength she had found. One morning, as the sun rose over the peaks, the mountain man appeared again on the trail. Myra greeted him with a quiet nod. For a moment, neither spoke. Then he said, "You are ready to accept yourself as you are, as you will be." That is the greatest change anyone can experience. Myra felt warmth in her chest. She had spent years hating herself, hiding from the world and doubting her worth. Now she was learning to embrace herself fully, not because others approved, but because she had finally seen her own value. The fear that had once dominated her days was now replaced by a steady awareness, a strength that could not be shaken by judgment or doubt. Her daily routine shifted in subtle ways. She prepared her meals more mindfully, choosing foods that nourished her body. She moved through the mountains with careful attention, observing changes in the land, the sky, and her own physical responses. She began keeping a journal, not just of her physical changes, but of her emotions, fears, and small victories. Writing became a way to understand herself, to track her growth, and to honor the quiet courage she had discovered within. The mountain man continued his quiet presence, never intrusive, always observing. Sometimes he shared small stories of his own life, how loss had taught him patience, how solitude had taught him understanding, and how observing the natural rhythms of life had shown him truths that no words alone could explain. Myra listened carefully. She did not always understand fully, but she began to see how his wisdom connected to her own journey. She realized that life's greatest lessons were often learned in silence, observation, and patience. Myra also began to feel more connected to the life growing within her. At first, the thought had filled her with fear, but now it became a source of wonder and quiet joy. She would place her hands on her stomach and feel a sense of protection, a recognition that she was nurturing something precious and alive. She began to speak to her child softly, telling stories of the mountains, the streams, and the quiet beauty of the world she had discovered. Each word felt like a promise, a commitment to the life she was bringing into the world. The mountain man noticed these changes too. He never commented directly, but his eyes held a quiet approval. Myra understood that he did not need to speak. The transformation she was experiencing was evident in her movements, her confidence, and the way she carried herself. She had learned to face fear, to accept uncertainty, and to embrace change. In doing so, she had become stronger, wiser, and more aware of her own power. One afternoon, Myra walked to the edge of a frozen stream, watching the water flow beneath the remaining ice. She realized that her life, like the mountains and rivers, could not be fully controlled, but it could be honored, nurtured, and guided with care. She understood that the journey she had begun in winter was not only about becoming a mother, but about discovering herself. The mountain man's words had not been a prediction to frighten or bind her. They had been a reflection of the potential already present within her. As the sun began to set, painting the mountains in golden light, Myra returned to the lodge with a sense of peace she had never known. She prepared a simple meal, tended the fire, and felt the quiet rhythm of her life settle around her. The fear and doubt that had dominated her winter months were no longer constant companions. In their place was awareness, acceptance, and the quiet courage to face what was coming. By now, Myra had learned to see the mountain man not as a predictor of her future, but as a guide in patience and observation. His presence reminded her that life's truths often arrived slowly, and that growth required care, attention, and trust. She had learned to trust herself, her body, and the unfolding journey ahead. And so, as spring fully arrived, Myra stood at the threshold of a new chapter in her life. She did not know every detail of what was to come, nor did she fully understand the mountain man's words from winter. But she knew she was ready to embrace change, ready to nurture the life within her, and ready to face the unknown with courage, strength, and hope. Spring had settled fully over the mountains. Snow had retreated to the highest peaks, streams gurgled freely through the valleys, and the air carried a warmth that had been absent for months. The world seemed to breathe again, and Myra felt it in her bones. Her body had changed in ways she had slowly begun to understand. She carried life within her, a new and fragile presence, and every day she felt a deeper connection to it. Myra's mornings became sacred. She would wake with the sun, feeling the quiet pulse of life in her body. She prepared warm water and simple meals, caring for herself with a devotion she had never experienced before. These routines, once mundane, now felt like acts of love and preparation. She wrote in her journal each day, recording her emotions, the small victories, and even the fears that lingered in the corners of her mind. Writing helped her see how far she had come, how much she had grown, and how ready she was for the life that awaited her. The lodge, which had once felt empty and lonely, now felt like a home. Myra decorated small corners with flowers she had gathered from the forest and placed clean cloths over the wooden furniture. She felt pride in the little touches she added to her surroundings, understanding that caring for her space was a reflection of caring for herself. She began to feel that she belonged, not only in the lodge, but in life itself. The mountains, which had once seemed imposing and isolating, now felt like guardians, silent witnesses to her transformation. The mountain man continued to visit, always quietly, always respectfully. He never offered advice that would force her decisions. Instead, he shared stories of the land, of the rivers that endured harsh winters, of animals that survived storms, and of trees that grew slowly but surely. Myra listened and learned that strength often came in quiet ways. The mountain man's presence reminded her that life's most important truths could not be rushed. They arrived in their own time, and part of living was learning to honor that rhythm. Myra found herself speaking to him more often now. She would ask questions about life, about the mountains, and about his experiences. He answered carefully, never forcing his ideas, always allowing her to draw her own conclusions. Myra felt grateful for his patience. She had spent years searching for someone to guide her, someone to tell her what was right, and now she realized that guidance often came in the form of quiet observation, not constant instruction. As the weeks passed, Myra noticed subtle changes in the baby growing within her. Small movements which had once startled her now felt like gentle reassurances. She placed her hands on her stomach and whispered softly, telling the child about the world outside the lodge, the mountains, the streams, and the quiet strength she had found within herself. Each day, she felt more confident in her ability to nurture and protect. The fear that had once dominated her thoughts began to dissolve, replaced by a steady and growing love she had never known possible. Myra's mind also grew calmer. The self-doubt that had plagued her for years no longer controlled her. She learned to observe her emotions without judgment, understanding that fear and uncertainty were natural, but that they could be met with patience and care. She recognized that life was not about perfection, but about growth. Each small step she took, each meal she prepared, each day she spent outdoors, each journal entry, was a building block for the life she was creating. One afternoon, as she walked along the ridge, she felt the sun on her face and the wind in her hair. The mountains stretched endlessly before her, beautiful and untamed. She realized that, like the mountains, she had endured winter and survived. She had faced fear, uncertainty, and self-doubt, and she had emerged stronger. The mountain man appeared at a distance, as he often did, watching quietly. Myra smiled at him, feeling a sense of gratitude she could not fully express. He had not forced her journey, but his presence had reminded her that she was capable of transformation. As spring deepened, Myra began preparing for the arrival of her child. She made the lodge ready, cleaning every corner, arranging soft blankets, and ensuring that food and water were easily accessible. She had learned to anticipate her needs and the needs of her child, understanding that preparation was an act of care, not anxiety. Each task she completed filled her with quiet pride. She felt a sense of purpose she had never known before. The days grew longer, and the first signs of new life appeared in the forest. Flowers bloomed in soft clusters, birds sang melodies that echoed through the valleys, and the air was filled with the scent of fresh growth. Myra felt a deep connection to the cycles of life around her. She understood that she was part of something larger than herself, a rhythm of growth, change, and renewal that had been unfolding long before she arrived. The mountain man spoke less frequently now. Myra understood that his role was not to direct her life, but to remind her of her own strength and potential. He would share small observations, how the sun hit the valley at a certain hour, how a tree grew despite harsh winds, how animals adapted to their environment, and she would listen and reflect. These lessons helped her see that patience, awareness, and care were more powerful than control or certainty. One morning, Myra felt her first real contraction. The sensation was strong, but she did not panic. She had spent months preparing her body and mind for this moment, and she trusted herself. She moved calmly through the lodge, arranging blankets, lighting the fire, and making a warm space for the birth. The mountain man appeared at the edge of the property, silent and watchful. His presence was steady, a reminder that she was not alone, even though she had to take the journey herself. Hours passed. Myra breathed deeply, listening to the rhythm of her body and the life growing within. She whispered words of encouragement to herself and to her child, feeling a deep connection that transcended fear. Every moment was a test of strength, patience, and courage, and Myra discovered that she possessed more than she had ever imagined. The winter doubts, the city rejections, and the years of self-criticism seemed distant, replaced by an overwhelming sense of purpose and love. Finally, as the sun dipped below the mountains, a cry filled the lodge. Myra held her son in her arms, overwhelmed by a mix of joy, relief, and awe. The child was healthy, strong, and alive, a symbol of the journey she had undertaken and the strength she had discovered within herself. Tears filled her eyes as she looked down at the tiny face, understanding that life was both fragile and miraculous. She whispered promises of protection, love, and guidance, feeling a profound sense of connection she had never experienced before. The mountain man watched quietly from outside. He did not enter the lodge, nor did he offer words. Myra understood that he had been right. Some truths arrive not to control us, but to prepare us. His earlier words, spoken in the depths of winter, had been a reminder of potential, a spark that had ignited her own growth and courage. She felt gratitude for his presence, not because he had directed her path, but because he had reminded her that she was capable of facing it. In the following days, Myra settled into her new life. She learned to care for her son, finding rhythms and routines that worked for both of them. She discovered patience she had never known, compassion for herself and others, and a deep understanding of her own strength. The lodge became a place of warmth, love, and safety, filled with the quiet beauty of life unfolding naturally. Myra also reflected on the journey she had taken. She had arrived at the mountains broken, uncertain, and weighed down by self-doubt. She had encountered the mountain man whose words challenged and frightened her. She had faced fear, uncertainty, and profound change, and through it all she had grown stronger. She understood now that the journey had been about more than giving birth. It had been about discovering herself, her resilience, and her capacity to love. The mountains, once silent and imposing, had become her teachers and companions. The streams, the forests, and the animals had shown her lessons of patience, persistence, and adaptation. The life growing within her had reminded her of the power of hope and the miracle of change. And the mountain man, quiet and observant, had reminded her that true guidance often comes not from answers, but from the presence of someone who believes in your strength before you can believe in it yourself. As spring gave way to early summer, Myra looked out over the valley, holding her son close. She felt a sense of peace and fulfillment she had never known. She knew that life would bring challenges, but she also knew that she had the strength to face them. The fears and doubts of winter were no longer her companions. They had been replaced by courage, awareness, and love. Myra realized that the journey had changed her in ways that went far beyond motherhood. She had learned to trust herself, to listen to her body, to honor the rhythms of life, and to embrace change with patience and care. She understood that life was not about certainty, but about growth, and that the most profound transformations often occurred quietly, within the heart and mind. The mountain man appeared one last time before she left the mountains. He did not speak of predictions or futures. Instead, he simply nodded, a silent acknowledgement of the journey she had completed. Myra smiled, understanding that the greatest lessons had been learned not from words, but from experience, reflection, and courage. She felt gratitude, not only for the child she now held, but for the life she had discovered within herself. And so, Myra left the mountains, carrying her son and a newfound strength. She returned to the world with confidence, patience, and love, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. She had learned that life's greatest truths arrive in their own time, that growth requires patience, and that courage is found not in avoiding fear, but in moving forward despite it. Myra's story, which had begun in winter with doubt and fear, ended in spring with life, hope, and renewal. She had discovered her own strength, embraced her true self, and stepped into motherhood with courage and love. The mountains remained behind her, silent witnesses to a journey of transformation, and the mountain man's words lingered softly in her heart. Some truths arrive not to control us, but to prepare us.